is super handy, because I think if you have like a name for a song, however non-judgmental you want to be or however open-minded you want to be, you end up writing to a song called X, Y, and like you say, that it kind of functions as the North Star in terms of how it guides your songwriting or whatever. So I think that generally speaking, it was only ever helpful. I think that the one that was the most difficult was I Wish I Was Dead, Bill Hicks.
Hello again, and welcome back. On this episode of The Record Process, you will hear our interview with lead singer and guitarist M. Foster of the English anarcho-punk band Nervus. On June 24th of 2022, the band released their fourth studio album titled The Evil One. Throughout this interview, we touch upon the evolution of the band's songwriting process, the pros and cons of coming up with song titles before writing the songs, and how loosening their grasp on ideas ultimately led to some of the band's most expressive compositions to date. You'll hear M talk about how adjusting vocal melodies to fit the right key can make a huge impact on how the song turns out, as well as how the band purposefully distances themselves from songs once they're written. We discuss how songs on this album turned out much differently than they had originally intended, and how the way M views their role in the songwriting process has changed over the years. All of that and much, much more is coming right up after this. So let's say you've just finished the latest round of mix revisions, or the last few tracks on a production you've been working on, but you want instant feedback before you go and ship them out. That's where Audio Mover steps in. Their revolutionary technology allows you to stream high-quality audio in real time, making remote collaboration a breeze. And with Audio Mover's Listen To plugin, there's no need for complicated setups or endless file sharing. Simply stream your audio directly from your favorite DAW to anyone, anywhere in the world in real time. And now with their newest plugin, they've made it possible to apply binaural rendering to Dolby Atmos mixes, allowing you to monitor how the spatial audio will sound on Apple Music. Through innovations like this, Audio Movers is leading a revolution in web-based audio transmission and reimagining the way musicians, podcasters, and educators engage with the world around them. So check them out at audiomovers.com and start your free trial today. One of the toughest hurdles for musicians and producers to overcome is recognizing when it's time to let your music go. So stop letting your music sit there on a hard drive waiting for the perfect label scenario to show up. Let DistroKid help you start reaching the fans you deserve right now. There's a reason why DistroKid is the go-to platform for independent musicians across all genres, and it's because they offer seamless and affordable solutions to distribute your music worldwide. Get your tracks on all the most popular streaming platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, and so many more in just a few steps. Time is often money, and DistroKid understands that. So they've eliminated long wait times for processing your music in the system, and in fact, they can get your music live in as little as 24 to 48 hours now. The simplicity of the platform and features like automatic revenue splits and YouTube content IDs make distributing your music and collecting payments incredibly simple. DistroKid does not take a percentage of your royalties, and for one low annual fee, you keep 100% of what you own. It's straightforward, transparent, and affordable. So follow the link in our show notes to get 30% off your new DistroKid membership and start letting your music work for you. If you're a solo musician, a singer, a songwriter, or part of a band, you know that the journey does not end once you have that finished master in hand. Building a lasting career around your music requires a lot of additional activities to do things like develop, promote, and ultimately monetize your creative vision. And for those of us that aren't quite doing Taylor Swift level numbers yet, it helps to have a merchandising partner that can meet you where you're at right now. And SmartPunk MFG is a perfect solution for any and all merch manufacturing needs your band might have. From the first note to the final stitch, they have it all covered with whatever you might need. They do screen printing, they do embroidery, stickers, vinyl and CD production, posters, and pretty much everything else under the sun. They are an incredibly comprehensive online merch solution offering reasonable prices and feasible quantities for bands of all sizes. So go check out some samples of what they can do at smartpunkmfg.com. And when you're ready, just shoot them an email at info@smartpunkmfg.com and mention the record process to get 10% off your first order. So remember, that's Smart Punk MFG, and it's where creativity meets manufacturing excellence. M. Foster of Nervus, welcome to the record process.
Hey.
Thank you for being here. We're excited to have you, and hopefully get a nice chance to chat across the pond as you're over in Margate, UK, about The Evil One, which is a great record that you put out last year.
Almost to the day.
Almost to the day, actually. Tom, you're right. We're 2 days away as we track this. Yeah. But let's set the stage. Why don't you tell anybody that might not be familiar with the project and everything around it leading up to this record, where it came from and how it started?
Cool. Yeah, thanks for having me. So Nervus started in around 2015. Put our first record out in 2016, a record called Permanent Rainbow. It started kind of like a bedroom songwriting project. I had no intention of it being a band, really. I was kind of bullied into that by the people who ended up in the band. But like an outlet for some songwriting I was doing and just messing around, really. But that turned into a band. Permanent Rainbow came out 2016, which was all self-produced, self-recorded. We hired like a studio for, I think, maybe 5 days, recorded the whole album. I dropped the hard drive on the floor. We recorded it again in 1 day, and that was that. So
I'm sorry. We're going to have to take a pause on that. I mean, this show is called The Record Process, and a full mulligan, I think might need a little bit more than just a glossing over. I'm going to have to ask you to unpack that a little bit more, Em, because that sounds highly traumatic for, I'm sure, almost everybody listening, but specifically Tom and I, who probably have a number of backup redundancies and hard drives, both at the studio and in the cloud. What happened? What was that like?
We self-recorded it, and so I was recording everything, and I was doing the last day, which was just vocals, and I'd foolishly decided to plug the hard drive in around the front of the desk, and I hadn't backed anything up because we'd been recording for 4 days, and I hadn't thought it would be necessary. I thought, it'll be in and out, and I won't need to back it up until it's all recorded. However, I hit record for the first vocal take on the last day of recording, caught the hard drive on my foot, pulled it off the desk, it smashed and just wouldn't reconnect. So I took it to like a hard drive specialist, and they were like, well, if you can recreate the data, that would be slightly cheaper than us trying to put it there. Because even if we get your files back, you're going to have to rebuild the whole project from scratch.
Tom's face. Well, you've now heard that. Yeah, but it was just... Yes, the heart sinking. That's true audio nightmare fuel. I'm so sorry. Well, if you can just, can you recreate the data? Oh boy. Wow.
So yeah, I called the band up and said, we're going to have to recreate the data.
Phrased it just like that.
That's the coolest way of saying, hey, let's retrack everything. Let's recreate the data.
Hey, we got to do some data recreation real quick. No big deal. Don't be alarmed.
We'd also run out of budget, so we only had budget for 1 more day in the studio. So we did a 22-hour session where we recorded the whole thing.
Well, okay then.
Hell yeah.
And the band survived. That's incredible.
Okay, so that's record number 1.
That was record 1. Record 2 was a little bit easier. We did a record called Everything Dies, where we got someone else to record the drums, which was exciting. And I recorded everything else, and then they mixed it. So that was cool. And that was kind of like a big point for us. We did a tour with like Creeper, and people seemed to be getting excited. That was exciting. And I just recorded that in my bedroom as well, apart from the drums. Tough Crowd was our third record, which came out 2019. That was the first time we worked with someone else, which was really exciting. Nothing got dropped. Everything was fine.
And who was that someone else?
There's a guy called Neil Kennedy who works out of a place called The Ranch in Southampton.
Yes. Talk about that space too, because Neil's done a number of records with a lot of bands, I mean, over there, but just in general. And I'm actually surprised, as I say this out loud, Tom, that we haven't had someone or had a record that's been done by Neil. So this might be the first time at it. To talk a little bit about what that experience was like, especially it being the first time you working with an outside collaborator in that role.
Yeah, it was amazing, because it just freed up so much more time to be creative. And Neil is just like brilliant at what he does. And in terms of like communicating ideas and him being able to kind of translate those irritating musical words that people use in a studio into actual things that sound good, he's brilliant at that. My vocabulary around production is not particularly good, so I find if someone can understand what I'm talking about, I find that really helpful, which is usually why I do stuff myself, because you know when people are like, can you make that sound a bit more glassy? And you're like, what? Neil thankfully kind of knew exactly what I was talking about. So it allowed for the whole process to be a lot more creative. And also it sounded brilliant. Like, that record sounds amazing. It definitely feels like we put a lot of money into it, and we were super proud of it. And that was Tough Crowd. That was our third record. But yeah, Neil's done a bunch of amazing stuff. That studio is great. It's like, it's got a little residential bit as well, so you can stay do it like that. So it felt good to be kind of like in the process altogether the whole time, because a lot of the time when we've done stuff, it's been like in and out. If you don't have a space, then you can't exactly have the whole band just sleeping in your own bedroom.
Yeah. Not ideal.
No, I want to go back real quick to some of that kind of language, that kind of like shorthand, because I think you're right. I think that is really important, to feel like there's that underlying current of communication and understanding. And I think that sometimes, even down to, whether it be sonic terminology or just kind of more ethereal descriptions. What were some of the moments that you really like? Because that's like an extension of trust. Even someone who, like Neil had a discography, clearly had records that you could listen to and be like, okay, he knows what he's doing, but you still don't really know how it's going to go in practice, right? When you get in under the hood to work on your own stuff. What were some of the memories that you had of that, as that first relationship that kind of is part of the evolution of all of these records?
I think like just being able to do stuff that I would have no idea how to do on my own. So there was like a couple of tracks on there where I was like, I really want the guitar to sound a bit like the Cure self-titled record from like 2003, where weird songs and drop D. And Neil was like, okay, cool. Listened to it for a couple of seconds and was like, all right, we'll do this. So that was super helpful. Like, there's like being able to play something a reference and then know kind of like exactly how to get the kind of sound that you're looking for.
Yeah,
totally. And that record was done by a Record Process alum and Casey, a fan favorite of Wonder Years, Steve Evans.
Yes, Steven was on that one, did some engineering. Yeah, I completely agree. Yes, I do want my guitar tone to sound like that, like Cure era, for sure. Not a bad reference point. You definitely got Tom and I with that. But I think that's great because, sometimes like these musical landmarks and references to other influences, whether they be really nuanced or specific, a lot of times I know, even on this show and just in general, it's very like, well, I kind of want the drums to feel like this record, or, to feel like, this space. And there's not always an easy way to define what you're talking about if you don't necessarily have a technical vocabulary. Mm-hmm. So it's important to be working with someone that kind of knows what that means on some other sub levels, right?
Definitely.
I guess like bring us into the headspace of The Evil One.
I think we wanted to try and do it the same way the first record went, but without dropping the hard drive. I think a lot of the stuff we listened to in the van is like really old. And so I think it's quite difficult to recreate some of the techniques that you'd hear in like an Eagles album or a Neil Young album in a studio with someone who wants it to sound absolutely brilliant. Because a lot of the time those things are kind of scrappy live to tape and stuff. And I'm not saying that Eagles or Neil Young records sound bad, but what I am saying is that they definitely sound of a different time in the way that, there was less equipment, less technology, and like less really going on between the instrument and tape, right? So we wanted to kind of take a more lo-fi approach, not necessarily because we wanted it to sound lo-fi, but just because we wanted to make it sound a little bit more, I guess, in a box, because we recorded it during the pandemic, and it kind of like, I know it's intensely boring talking about pandemic records. I wouldn't call it a pandemic record, and like, but I think, yeah, we were definitely in a place where we wanted something to sound a little bit more in a box. This is my lack of musical vocabulary coming through. We wanted it to sound in a box. So yeah, we went up to our drummer's house in Northumberland, which is maybe like a 7-hour drive from where I live in Margate. He has this tiny studio in his house there that was like maybe 6 by 6 meters in a room, and we recorded everything in there. So we were literally, he was sat there, he engineered the drums and I engineered everything else, and we just did it all from the same room, leaving the drum kit in there a lot of the time as well, and just having just everything in this tiny space. I think, in a weird way, we kind of wanted the recording process to reflect where we'd kind of been at, where we'd written it. So we just went into a small room, made a lot of noise. So yeah, we kind of started it like that. Tried to kind of get it just sounding a little bit more raw than the last record, because I think a lot of the stuff that you would hear, and like, this is no diss to any modern successful bands, because they're all successful and modern and they're good, right? But a lot of it sounds very like widescreen and super like cinematic, and I think that's really cool, but it's the exact opposite of what we do as a band. And I think like Tough Crowd had an element to that was really cool, but yeah, we wanted to just kind of go backwards completely in terms of the way we produced it, and just make it super minimal and take that approach to it that way. So yeah, we came out with what we've got, which is a weird sounding record, I've got to say, but I really
Well, I love I love you say weird sounding record, right? And it's so interesting too, because I think a lot of that comes down to you being aware of the expectations of what a lot of, like you said, what a lot of, modern recordings are able to do or try to achieve. And I think that's a really interesting way of wanting to, in its own way, kind of push against that grain, and shoot for a different mark, considering those things. So there's obviously, a lot of choices that get made in this case, the way you kind of captured these songs, right? But I'm curious, when it comes to the songwriting specifically, even before going in, was there, what was the thought process and the mindset that you were trying to capture, and how did that maybe differ, if at all, or, where were you at in terms of that mindset going into this tracking phase?
For the songwriting stuff, usually it'll start with just me and a guitar and an idea. I usually try and have a different starting point every time I write a song. So whether that be with a different instrument, or whether that be from starting from a drum pattern or whatever it is, I wanted to start from a different point. For this record, for some reason, I decided that I would start with the song titles before writing anything else.
Ooh.
The track listing was the first thing we wrote, and the name of the songs were there, and I was like, right, okay, I'm going to write a song called I Wish I Was Dead, Bill Hicks now. So yeah, it was just kind of a different approach to that. And I think that I had quite a strong idea of like what I wanted to write about, but I didn't want it to necessarily come out. I don't know. I think like when you're approaching, specifically lyrically, approaching topics like, for example, environmentalism or abolition or anything like that, it can be really easy to slide into a kind of a preachy mindset, which is not something I wanted to do necessarily, because it wasn't. I'd like to give the people who are listening a little bit more credit than to think that I have to preach stuff to them anyway. So it was really just a case of, by giving myself the limit of like I'd already named the songs, I thought, okay, I can write a song about this or whatever, and it can fit into it in whatever way. So yeah, the band, we actually didn't play the songs together until we recorded them. So we've never done that before. So and we ever played the songs together was when we got into the studio, and we kind of worked on our own parts separately and just kind of let each other do exactly what we wanted to do. So the first time we heard it come together was like a massive surprise as well.
Wow.
Capturing that energy, just from the initial, oh shit, you're playing this? Oh fuck yeah. And just getting that going. Love that. You said something about starting with the song titles, and a buddy of mine down in Nashville, that's one of their rules that they do, and they're working on pop stuff, but they always start with the song title, and specifically to make have that shining light throughout the yeah. It's so very cool to know that this is another the results are still slammer songs. They all rock, by the way, but just different genres can use the same rules and still get very cool results. And I love that.
And what's interesting, I wonder, because what you kind of described, like you're like the track listing is the first thing that was written. One, did the order stay the same way? Two, it's almost like you're kind of creating this like album acrostic where you're like, okay, these are all of the bullet points. Now I have to go fill each one of the, the phrases in or the word in behind it. In this case, each one of those words or phrases being the song itself is a really interesting, I don't even want to say experiment, but I think I'd love you to talk a little bit more about what that yielded and how that maybe shaped some of the directions of the songs, or if there were any times that maybe it didn't work or created some hurdles for you.
Yeah, do you know what? I think working from that way round is super handy, because I think if you have like a name for a song, however non-judgmental you want to be or however open-minded you want to be, you end up writing to a song called X, Y, and like you say, that it kind of functions as a North Star in terms of how it guides your songwriting and whatever. So I think that generally speaking, it was only ever helpful. I think that the one that was the most difficult was I Wish I Was Dead, Bill Hicks, which is a Stuart Lee joke. So I don't know if you know Stuart Lee, but he's a British comedian. And the joke is in his stand-up that dead comedians tend to do a lot better and have it a lot easier than living ones, because everyone loves Bill Hicks. Everyone loves dead Bill Hicks. He doesn't have to come up with a new show. Everyone just... And he says, I wish I was dead Bill Hicks. Funny in its own sense, but also I really like the way that kind of like functions as like this grotesque metaphor for how people just, would rather be popular and dead than, have to keep
Yeah.
And I think the real difficulty for that came from not wanting to write a song that felt like I was being mean about Bill Hicks. Yeah, it was quite interesting. But it actually turned out as like one of my favourite songs on the record. And because of that reason, I think I took a different approach entirely to how I wrote the song. Like that song starts off just as an acoustic guitar and a 4-part harmony, and ends up with this kind of weird, loads of reversed instruments, distorted drums that don't really sound like drums, and like basically like gradually just turns into a big load of feedback and noise. That was the most difficult one, but also the one that yielded, I think, my favourite result from the record. But other song, like Rental Song, I thought that like, for some reason, my PlayStation Network gave me that as my username when I logged in one time. It just gave me like Rental Song. And I was like, Rental Song. I was like, that's cool.
Yeah, just taking what the universe gives you. I like it.
Yeah. I was like, that's cool. I'll have that. And yeah, then going into writing it, I think I kind of took that playfulness with me. I mean, the lyrics to that song, incredibly stupid and tongue-in-cheek, but it was also a lot of fun to write. And like having Evan from Into It Over It on there as well, because I basically wrote a key change that I couldn't sing, and I was like, I bet Evan from Into It Over It could sing that. So
I love that. Wow, you wrote yourself right into a guest spot. Oh, that's awesome. Well, actually, that's interesting too. I'm curious in terms of talking about how songs kind of adapt and evolve as you're writing them. So you kind of took the always forward, never bet, instead of like reconfiguring the key around whatever. You're like, nah, the rest of it's great. Now this is the next puzzle piece that I need to solve. And that's a nice solution there with Evan for sure. I love that. Were there any other moments, maybe like from the writing to how things progressed once you got in that like 6x6 meter room, that kind of shook things up in terms of how something, maybe ended a little bit differently than how you saw it in your mind's eye while writing?
Yeah, so a couple of them came out completely different. Iconoclast, the first song on the record, Jack, who was drumming for us at the time, played the drums on that. And it was this just wild beat that starts the record. Like as soon as the drum kicks in, it's just like toms everywhere, like really, really fast, really, really cool. And I think that really changed the energy of it in a way that I wasn't prepared for when we were in the studio. Like he's a brilliant drummer and he's still drumming now, not for us anymore. But I like hearing that for the first time in the studio. Yeah, just like changed the way I approached the way I was playing guitar for it, for example. So I think like having all those things, because we did everything in the same order that you might expect, with drums, then bass, then guitars, then keys and vocals, which was great because it meant that when it came to, getting through to like where I was playing my guitar, I would play a lot more to what the rhythm section was doing than what I had necessarily in my head. So yeah, things just came out like different to how I expected them to. And a lot of them just came out a lot more like rock songs than I expected them to, which was cool, I think.
So like you have your bass and drums and you're playing to the rhythm section, but did like the timbre of the guitars change like how you wrote any parts like of the physical like recording? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I was conscious that I was tempted to kind of like crank the distortion and play a little harder, but actually just dialed the distortion and stuff back, because I thought I don't want to accidentally make a record that sounds similar to the last records, or I was actually weirdly trying to avoid making a punk record, which sounds really strange from a punk band, but
that's the most meta punk thing you can do.
Yeah.
Is say I refuse to make a punk record. I'm a true punk.
That was an interesting approach. I'd also just got this new guitar that I was like, this sounds really different to what I usually play. So I got the Jazz Master Noventa from Fender that year, 3P90s one, which is a lot of fun to play. It sounds really fat, and I think you get a lot more out of it from playing harder than you would like a normal single coil guitar as well. So yeah, a reaction to the music was to kind of go harder, and then also just me reining it in as well as part of trying to show some restraint somewhere.
Yeah.
Totally. And like, especially with like distortion, like that's something that like, I feel like everyone goes through at some point. Like, oh yeah, it needs more distortion. That will make it 100% better. And you're like, yep, more. And then like, specifically in the writing phase, like I feel like my brain's always like, yeah, distortion. And then like you put everything else on and then you're like, fuck.
Yeah.
It's too much. But so that's so cool. I love that.
If you're listening to this show, I'm guessing there's a good chance that you're the type of person that appreciates the time and effort that goes into something meaningful, something lasting, and something that tells the world exactly who you are. Well, Brett and Dave, the co-founders of our sponsor, Oxford Pennant, share that very same appreciation. They've made it easier than ever to elevate any space in your life and express your style with their meticulously crafted American-made pennants. From classic designs to customized creations, each piece is a work of art. It's quality you can feel and a statement that truly lasts a lifetime. I recently had the pleasure of touring their Buffalo-based shop where they tirelessly make each piece by hand. And honestly, their process really is an inspiring fusion of passion and precision. So go make your mark, celebrate your story, and discover the epitome of timeless craftsmanship and personalized expression by visiting oxfordpennant.com today. We had Jay Moss on the show talking about one of the Defeater records and him as a guitar player talking about how a lot of the energy and tone comes from your hand, right? Comes from like how hard you dig in, and I've always been a firm believer in that there is a transference of energy in the actual playing that you're just not going to get the same if you try and, substitute it by, given a little touch up on the gain knob, you know what I mean? Like, and especially in the clarity of punk records, rock records, where you're layering stuff, or like, there's already a lot of sound level and breakup being pushed. It can do some things of disservice in terms of, the clarity and the energy and punch of stuff that you're actually looking for. So I love that. I kind of have a sub question here. When you're writing, are you writing with an acoustic, or maybe specifically for this record, because perhaps it has changed from song to song? Are you writing with an acoustic or an electric, with an amp there? And if the answer is different, do you think that affects how you write or kind of draw up a vocal in your mind?
I mean, the writing process for the Evil one specifically was different to any other writing process we've done. One, because I gave myself the limitation of writing on a guitar that was missing the top E string because of the continuity from our last tour. So I played the show in Berlin on the 13th of March 2020, and then that was the last show we played. And I was like, I'm going to write the next record on this guitar without changing the strings. So they were dead as hell, those strings as well. So I think I ended up playing a little harder when I was doing demoing and stuff. Dylan from Cloud Nothings tweeted saying, I'm doing guitar lessons. Does anyone want to do guitar lessons? And I was like, well, I don't really feel like I need guitar lessons, but I don't think anyone who plays guitar does necessarily feel like they need guitar lessons. So I'm going to have guitar lessons. So I hit Dylan up and was like, I'd love guitar lessons. And he was like, well, it sounds like you can play guitar. Do you want to do songwriting lessons? And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. So we basically sat and like I paid him like a teacher fee and did like Zoom songwriting sessions with him where we'd like work through songs and stuff. But Cloud Nothings, I think, are a band that do that. What you were just saying about how, you know, that energy and like dialing it back and like creating something that is, you know, the dynamics are built really at source, you know, in terms of where people are playing and where people are singing, rather than like being layered in the production process or whatever. I think Cloud Nothings do that incredibly. So it was cool to like throw some ideas back and forth with him for some of their songs too. It definitely was a different process, but I wasn't playing on an acoustic guitar because I think that was in my van and my van was broken down somewhere.
Okay, but the guitar with basically road-worn rubber bands at that point, it sounds like, flopping around with no high E string. That's also an interesting choice that creates some necessity of invention and probably affected that. I know, for example, Dan, the singer of my band, you know, really has to feel what the words and melody feel like in that range. And so, you know, he isn't convinced that a song is working or that a melody is working or phrase is working until he hears, and more specifically, I think, feels himself belted at like full conviction. But he's learned to be able to do that with just an acoustic, even though many might be like, oh, this is very obtrusive if I'm showing this song to someone and I'm screaming in their face in a tiny green room. We've tried to encourage and say, yeah, no, we don't care. Bring it on. Right. But so I'm curious if, you know, it's probably a little tough to do that over Zoom, right? The quality is not great. I do some kind of one-on-one mentoring and coaching with artists as well, and do some remote production and songwriting stuff. And that is, Zoom specifically is not always the most audio friendly. If you do turn off the audio gate, that helps a little bit, but like you're not in the same room. You know, you don't feel those things that otherwise, you know, would be maybe the body language or those intangible like feelings of, oh yeah, it's working, or that's great, or we're in there, let's dig in a little bit more. So do you find yourself as a songwriter where like have there ever been times where, for example, you go into the studio and you know what this has felt like as one independent person, but then you get it with a full band, or like, you know, plug in and really start going and hear what the amp sounds like, and it just feels like something isn't working anymore with the vocal or the line?
Yeah, specifically the vocal, I get that from time to time, because I think like my vocal range is like, I guess like a bass range, right? A classical bass range. So like my highest is around like E4. So sometimes I'm like singing in a way that I feel like, but I'm definitely more comfortable and can get more projection when I'm up around that area. So sometimes what I'll do when I'm writing is I'll put something in a certain range, and I'll get with the band and we'll start playing it, and I'll be like, oh my God, I just sound like I'm mumbling because it's completely wrong. And so I go back and like rewrite the vocal. So Chew It, which is like on the latter end of this album, was one of those songs where I wrote a vocal melody that sounded great when I was just sort of like singing it quietly in between my upstairs neighbor and my downstairs neighbor in my flat. But when it got to playing it all together, I was like, no, this actually sucks. So I'm going to change it.
And can you like describe what the feeling of bad felt like? Describe it not working.
Feeling of it not working is feeling like I can't put into it what I want to put into it, because if I put what I want to put into it, I'll go out of tune. Or I think that there's moments where, I think it's specifically with singing in a lower range as well, there's moments where it works, but there's moments where it just doesn't. And I think that when, you know, there's some songs that I think sound great on record where I've sung it in the studio and I feel like that's cool, that's what the song is. But you go to play it live or put it into a live setting, and there's just something that is just, you know, the amount of restraint that you're having to put on yourself in terms of the projection of your voice or whatever it is, it doesn't serve the way you're playing the song live, and just feels like you're kind of holding a bit back. And then you feel a bit kind of sheepish, weird. This is not a vibe. And then, yeah, I think that's kind of how it feels, like specifically with regard to like vocal performances. With guitar performances, I think there's a different thing where you feel bad, where you've written something that you think maybe sounds cool, and you come to play it in a live setting, and it's like the most difficult thing to play. It almost becomes like the least favorite song you're playing, and then I think that affects your performance as well, even if it sounds great.
Again, bringing it back to J Moss, literally he was like, what can I do to, like, the Defeater record that we were talking about was like 80% playability level, so that like live absolutely can crush, like, no matter what. I love that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wonder if too there, you kind of mentioned like, finding that sweet spot almost where you can fully put the conviction behind something, vocally, but then also performatively in a live space, but still sounds great and fills everything out on recording and seems interesting. It's right. They're not always, I think that's kind of a true test too, especially with guitar driven music as well. And I think also you're talking about, with this record trying to strip it down, do a bit more of a classical, nod to some of those records. And I think what makes a lot of those, I get this like very like Tom Petty-esque vibe, like big strummy chords on an electric, pushing like an AC30 or something, right? And I think what's great about those songs and the way that they are crafted they are kind of that sweet spot, right? Where it just feels good, big time strummy. If it's a riff, it's not like an overly complicated riff. It's a really memorable riff, but something that's also just like fun to play. So it's kind of at that like 80% level where you need like 80% of your capacity, but you're not like all of a sudden trying to take yourself out and get too analytical and go 100% like shooting for the stars, really trying to stretch, and all of a sudden it becomes less about the performative end of it and more about just trying to execute, and it takes you out of that. I think that's really interesting. And I feel like maybe even with some of these songs, you kind of hit that cross section almost maybe unintentionally by going for that vibe, by not trying to overproduce it and over complicate things.
Yeah, I think that was something that I definitely learned from the first couple of records we did, because we toured them quite a lot, and like there's a lot of like fiddly guitar bits, weird time signatures, just a lot of stuff going on. And I think like when we released Tough Crowd, we'd taken a lot of that away, and people were like, where are all your riffs? I was like, have you ever tried to play this and sing at the same time? It's like impossible. Because I think the live space is like, my favorite. And I think that that's where people make connections with song. I do think that like people can connect with music now just listening and through records. But I think that increasingly I find myself becoming more connected to music through like live performances, more than I ever used to, I think. I think I used to be like a headphones person, but now I'm definitely like, I would rather go and see a band live on their new tour without hearing their new record and listen to all their new songs than I would listen to their record, which is, I don't know, it's a weird thing, especially considering like I love like producing records and making my own records, like, and I want for people to listen to our records, but I think like the live space is just a way to connect with it in a more personal way. And so I wanted these to translate just basically that energy that we tried to capture on the record to translate really perfectly in the live space as well, which I think with some of our older stuff was quite difficult because we'd bitten off a bit more than we could chew with regard to like the technicality of it or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's always something to say about like a song that holds up from like the cutting of the teeth at DIY shows, basement shows, that kind of stuff. Case, what was Dan, like how he holds the mic live on stage, I feel like is like from like VFW shows.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah. So our front of house guy will always, kind of, it's become a running joke throughout like our career with Wonder Years. But yeah, same things like playing floor shows with a shitty PA that can barely get over, a drummer that's smashing the shit out of his cymbals and, two half stacks that are cranked up way too loud. There's no great balance. So as a singer, you're like, okay, there's no floor wedges. The PA is like, one speaker's like the tweeter's blown on one speaker and the amp, it keeps overheating. It barely put anything out. So like his thing was like partially just learning vocally to like sing and kind of cup a mic. And it created this like mid-range honk that he could hear just a little bit easier over and gave him just a little bit of extra compression to hear just out of a sheer necessity almost, just to like be able to hear pitch. And that's a habit that kind of followed through and a comfort level. And there's almost like a sonic comfort that he'll still do it from time to time, even though a lot of the other dynamics and things about like the live sound settings and venues that we're playing have changed completely. That's still there because it's a familiarity that was built out of just trying trying to get something over in that live space, mixing with everything. And I think there's also kind of a performative energy and even a compositional thing. Like that became normal to his ear in its own way. It didn't sound bad, to him, because it was what he had started to know and become used to. And I think in the same way, yeah, Tom, that what you're talking about is trying to, capture things, but take those habits that come from playing songs live, which we don't always get the opportunity to like cut through a bunch of material on a new record on a couple tour cycles before you record it to really workshop it. Right. So I think that's really interesting and kind of trying to make sure that all those decisions worked well and would work well once they were road tested.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in this sentence, they were kind of road tested by you beating the shit out of the rubber band string guitar. Yeah. So like it's like somewhat road tested, but I love that. Oh, yeah. Man.
And you had done the research with previous albums as well. So you knew what worked, what songs you liked playing most live, you know what I mean? So I think that's also always really valuable, which is why I think the context of knowing that of what came before with the project always informs kind of where it goes, one way or the other. So yeah, I mean, I love that, man. The last thing I want to ask, kind of, because you mentioned, producing records and then also kind of writing songs, but then also performing. How do you find yourself dealing with wearing a lot of those different hats from time to time? And do you feel like they all work as one, or there's a specific time and place that you're able to like shift your mindset and what role you're playing?
Once the song's written, I try and I tend to like distance myself from it in a certain way. Not in the sense that I don't want to connect with what I've written, but in the sense that it's not mine anymore. Like it's like, it's the band song, like I've written it. And so the songwriting, with regard to the songwriting hat, once the record's done, I'm like, these are just songs that I like, that we've made. So it's quite easy to separate the songwriting stuff from that. But with the production stuff, I think like my actual approach to everything, which I think from the first couple of records, I think surprised the people I record with, I tend to go with quite a complete demo to the band. So it'll have like drums, bass, maybe a keys idea, maybe harmonies, and usually like lyrics and a melody, because I kind of get carried away. I don't feel like I want to send this over to these people yet because it doesn't feel like a full thing. But I think what people kind of that I've played in Nervus with were always surprised by it was how not precious I am about any ideas, and how I think like not being necessarily precious about parts or ideas, or not having any attachment to them, I think is like the way that gets me through having all those different hats. So like if someone comes with an idea for something else, and from a songwriting perspective, from a production perspective, then cool, let's give it a go. Like it doesn't have to do it like this. We don't have to do it like anything. We can do whatever we want. And I really like that's what being a band is, right? So yeah, I think a lot of like just helping to like the way I see my role in Nervus is like kind of helping to guide the process, but with no real attachment to anything that I bring necessarily. So like letting it be what it can be.
That can be really tough, huh? You bring stuff to a group. A lot of times, you've already in some way developed an attachment to it because you're green lighting it to say, I think this is good enough to bring to the group, you know what I mean? To bring to other people to pitch. And especially too, if you're kind of fleshing out full ideas, that's also kind of part of this almost like inherent pitch process where, you're like, well, I want to make sure they get the full weight of the idea, as it's presented. I know this, I mean, hell, I still laugh about it from time to time. It's kind of how I got into like mixing and or producing as well, is just doing band demos. And every time you do a new one, you're like, the last one, I feel like they didn't really kind of get the idea here that I put across. So let me spend a bit more time, like shaping it out so that they definitely understand what I'm going for. And then eventually you're like, well, now I'm just chasing the mix carrot. And now I'm just chasing, like trying to find out how the secrets to make sure that my drum sound that I'm putting on these demos doesn't distract people, because it's so bad from an otherwise good idea. And And then, here we are. But yeah, I mean, that's a great, idea and approach to have, to kind of distance yourself and realize maybe this idea that I think is great is not the end idea, but maybe it's the catalyst for another idea that's just as good, if not better. And being open to that, I think is awesome. Yeah.
And I mean, sometimes it happens in the live setting too. There's a song that we play off our second record called "It Follows," where there's like a whoa part in it, and it goes whoa oh whoa oh, but no one in the live setting does that. They just go whoa oh whoa oh, and I'm like, fine, I'm not gonna stop. Hold on, you're doing that wrong. Do you mind if we go back and try that again? There's a bit where it stays on that note for a bit longer.
Yeah. What's funny about that too, Emma, is now I think back, and again, this starts to happen with songs that you play night after night, year after year. You actually go back, and even like, for example, with some Wonder Years stuff, we'll go back and have to go through like doing a tab book for the guitar parts or whatever. And I'm like, oh, that's not at all how I play. It's like, that's what the record was. That's what me on the record did. I didn't even realize 10 years later, it has morphed into something a little different. I'm like, do I put the tab in of how I played the end of that phrase now? Or do I, and I usually just default to whatever was on the record. But like, yeah, it's like some songs don't stop evolving just because you take a snapshot of them. That's a really great point.
At that point, you're serving the greater song idea rather than you're delivering the best version or the version that fits you at that time.
Right?
Or the version that other people are more comfortable with.
Yeah, the version that fits them at that time. Yeah.
That's brilliant. So really what we're saying here is that, this record, like the Evil One and whatever record comes next, is really just kind of a check-in with the fans and audience of like, hey, this is where Nervus was at this time in this space. And it's just kind of like you're just paying homage to that. But yeah, the song idea in and of itself kind of continues to grow. And this is what I love too. It's like, it doesn't stop with just releasing that's where it kind of starts, because the songs take on a life of their own when listeners interact with them and then react to them live and do what they do. I'll give you another very interesting other side of the pond example, actually. Speaking of this, the only place that this happens actually is in Europe. But with the Wonder Years song, there's a song called Washington Square Park that starts with a guitar riff. Soccer fans in mainland Europe apparently love to literally sing that riff at the beginning of the song, and it's not a very singable riff. If you can catch the little nugget that I just did, but having like an entire venue where it's just like the hits, and then eventually a couple of this must have been years ago, where it kept happening like multiple nights in a row, and I was like, I'm just not going to play the riff now. This is too good. So then it was just the whole band doing the hits and then the crowd kind of singing. I was like, this is too funny. I got to let this ride. And so that became the like international, the like European version of that song for the tour, which is really funny and kind of reminds me of that, where it takes on a life of its own for sure, based on how everybody interacts with it and digests it. So there you go. And this was wonderful. We cannot thank you enough. Where can everybody go get more info on, what y'all are doing with Nervus, what's coming next, and what you're doing in the meantime?
Instagram and Twitter is where we're usually at. So Nervus Music is Nervus without the O as well. So Nervus Music on both of those. But we're all doing a bunch of different stuff as well. So Paul's at the LP Cafe running a record shop in Watford. Maeve's up in Leeds doing a solo project called Gordian Stem and playing I Told You I'd Eat You as well, who are a great band. And Lucinda's doing solo stuff and also plays in Cult Dreams. So we're in the sort of like in between. We're writing some stuff. We're getting ready for the next phase. But yeah, come say hey, and thanks so much for having me as well. It's been really cool chatting to you about stuff.
Yeah, of course.
Our pleasure. Yes. We look forward to whatever comes next. It seems like everybody is quite busy and quite prolific over there with that bunch, and we love to hear it. We look forward to seeing what comes next. You heard M describe how the songs that came out of this process often ended up completely different than they were originally intended to. And sure, we talk about the idea of keeping an open mind as a songwriter and how that is one of the hallmarks of great collaboration. But it's not always easy. And I think there's an incredible maturity in what M expressed about how they've come to view the process of songwriting and how their role within it has changed over the years. How that role has become more of a guide in the process with no real attachment to personal ideas, letting it be what it can be. And I think their history of working in really fruitful collaborative circles has changed their individual perspective on how to best contribute. When I was younger, I remember almost feeling a palpable fear that ideas would get convoluted or tarnished by too much experimentation or manipulation. I would try to desperately preserve the current iteration of what we had, assuming any change would upset the delicate balance of perfection. But here's what I was missing. Over time, I realized that what this mindset failed to acknowledge was the potential for additional pathways that still culminated in a result I could stand behind 100%, but maybe for a different set of reasons. So stay curious about the possibilities you don't see on first or second glance, and accept the challenges that new ideas are going to offer you. Because it's the challenges and facing them that make us better creators.
The Record Process.